Alright, so a couple updates about the RS. I have one successful print from it so far. I'm currently have my second print going. I have been having some issues with it. I have been in contact with Heygears support through the ticket system in Blueprint, and they're currently looking into it. I don't know how many other people have an RS right now, so maybe this will be resolved by the time other people start getting them. But what's been happening is for like the first, I don't know exactly how many, but because so far I've only been able to stay and watch it to about layer like 30 or 40, and then I've had to leave for other obligations. But what happens is I start the print, and every layer up to like layer 40, as long as I was able to watch it, every layer is taking like 15 minutes. The plate retracts and then it just sits in the vat. It doesn't seem like it's doing anything, and every layer is taking 10 to 15 minutes. So it's drastically increasing print times. I'm having high estimated print times. I'm getting even higher actual print times. For example, my first print was estimated for 12 hours and 37 minutes or something like that. And the actual print was about 14 hours. I sliced the same file or the same layer height on my regular Reflex to see what that was. Now, granted, my regular Reflex has the PRM. I'm still waiting on the PRM VAT for my RS, so I don't have that option for that one. But the original Reflex with PRM, that same layer height print, same settings otherwise, sliced to an estimated time of 8.5 hours. So it was like 4 hours faster than what the RS was estimating. And then actually 6 hours faster than what the actual print time ended up being. But yeah, it was like 4 hours into the print and it was only on layer 36. So clearly something going on with it, because once the printer gets going, like right now it's on layer 3380 out of 3751, and you can see much quicker. Obviously not 10 to 15 minutes per layer going on there. Also, I just want to mention, I love the sound of this motion system. I love when you can just hear something working, some kind of thing operating like that, and you can just tell by the sound that it's like a tight system. No backlash. It just sounds tight. So yeah, definitely the motion system is no joke with the RS. It clearly has potential for accurate and fast prints. So if we can get this figured out with Heygears support and get it printing properly for those early layers, not just sitting for 10 to 15 minutes, I can easily see this printer outpacing the original Reflex by a quite large margin, especially once you add the PRM as well. So I'm really excited to get that figured out and get my PRM VAT so I can actually see what this thing can do, because the potential is definitely there. Alright, so moving on, a couple things I wanted to show, and I'm sorry for, oh, you know what, why am I filming like an idiot? Let me go ahead and do this so you don't have to watch a portrait video. As you can tell, I'm new to this. This is not my forte, so kind of just flying by the seat of my pants here. But two things that Heygears support, I was kind of talking to them about something, because there used to be a setting. Just make sure I have my settings right here. There used to be a setting in Blueprint. Let's just put some random things in. Hang on one second. So this has the potential to really speed up your processing time for like setting up a print. There's one thing is, you know, if you're trying to print a bunch of stuff, you're gonna take up all of the space on your build plate. You know, it gets annoying playing Tetris, trying to find the right spot for everything to get the maximum amount of stuff on your plate as possible. It just is time consuming to sit here and move stuff around and try and get it all to fit correctly. So there was a setting that I just randomly decided to try it one day, and it was in between here, auto support and manual support. There was an option, it was called full bed support. Basically what you could do is you could import all your stuff, you could select, you know, do your orientation, get everything oriented, and then layout. You know, you could make your stuff nice and tight, get the most amount of stuff on there as possible, and then lay it out. Alright, that's great, but there's no supports on here. Sometimes the way that it lays it out, if you lay out before there are supports, when it generates the supports, it's going to have supports just intersecting and going through the model, which obviously you don't want. So you kind of, if you were to support first and then layout, well, then the system is very conservative about how it lays things out. Like, it won't let any of the rafts touch. Like, you know, it just won't put things nearly as close as is efficient to try and get the most on your print bed in one print. So generally what I had been doing is I would do this, lay them out. Sometimes I would do a little bit more than 1 mm just to kind of have a better base to work from, but then I would lay it out, then I would support it, and then I would just kind of go through and look at like the areas where things are too close, and I would kind of move from there. But what that full bed support option did was it let you do what we did here, just orient, lay it out, and then hit full bed support. It would do a full bed raft, and then it would automatically support everything that was on the bed as if it was like one object. And it would automatically look to avoid collision, so it would move supports and move like the grid supports to avoid intersecting any of the models anywhere. So I had just found this out, and it like saved so much time with setting up prints. And then there was like an update the next day, and now it's gone. So I was like wondering what happened to that. So I reached out to Heygears support and I asked about it. And what they said is it was replaced with a new feature. So apparently, so I actually haven't even done this yet, but I did kind of look at it the other night to kind of see how I thought it would work based on how they described it. So I think this is what we're going to do. So we select all of our models and then click the 3 dots here and then group. And then I think we can select group, auto support, and then just set up our supports here. So that's the settings I usually use for part 10 with the PRM 0.09 embed. I usually do like 0.20 to 0.24 tip diameter depending on what it is, and then 35 overhang arrow angle, and I leave everything else pretty much the same. Sometimes, depending on the size of the model, I'll change reinforce height if it's like a big model, or if it's like something where it has like a lot of low points in the model. So basically what this reinforce height does is anytime there's like a spot on your model that starts as an island and then grows upwards as it prints, it'll reinforce that lowest point of the model by just adding more supports. So what you're telling it here is basically how high, basically the easy way to think of it is just how much extra support do you want in that spot. So if it's like a big model, for example, with a lot of low points, I may up this to 3 or 3.5, and then that kind of allows you to lower your overall tip diameter. So it's like, yes, you have more supports going to those lowest areas, but you can lower your overall tip diameter, which just means smaller blemishes for your models overall. You can clean up those lowest points if you want to, but honestly, in my experience with the PRM especially, even with part 10 at like 20 to 24, 0.2 to 0.24 millimeter tip diameter, it leaves such a small mark that they're nearly imperceptible anyway. So I don't even really worry about it too much. I usually do like a light cleaning with a hobby knife. Usually when I'm like going through and cleaning up any of the smaller supports that are left on the model after curing, if there are any blemishes that are a little bit bigger than the usual or the typical across the rest of the model, I'll just go ahead and clean it up while I'm getting those smaller supports. Alright, so back to supporting as a group or an assembly. So we've already selected all these models, we've grouped them into a group, and now we're going to do our auto supports. So let's see what it does here. Definitely taking longer than it would if it was individual small models like this. I don't think Blueprint is... Okay, let's see what we got here. Okay, nice. So yeah, I mean, it looks like it basically does what it did with full bed supports, but this is actually even better, honestly, because now you can choose what models you want to group together. So say you want to have a certain number of models. Say you have like one big thing that you're doing over here, and then you have a bunch of little things that you want to support. This new method actually lets you do it even better, because before your only option was to do the full bed support, but now it looks like you can actually set up your groups how you want to and then support those groups individually. So that's really awesome. I'm glad to see that it works how I was thinking and expecting it would. And nowhere does it tell you how to do this. I kind of just figured out that full bed support thing, and then in trying to figure out where it went, Heygears told me about it. So I imagine not many people know about this. So this is definitely an easier and faster way to support models, because just to kind of overview again, you can just import, select all of them, orient, go to your layout tab, auto layout, and then since none of them have supports yet, it will be able to lay them out at a very nice tight Tetris going on there, so you can get more stuff on the plate. And then once they're laid out in that on the plate, select the ones you want to group, click your three dots, and then create a group. And then once you do that, when you select the model, it'll select that whole model as one group, and then you just support it as if you were supporting any other model. Just hit auto support, and then it'll automatically account for collision and try and avoid intersecting supports with the model. Alright, so let's just go ahead and undo all this, and then ungroup there. So next thing I'm going to show you how you can use Blueprint to support a model, and then export it so that you can basically print a pre-supported model on another printer that isn't a Heygears printer, but you can still use Heygears' awesome auto supports, because in my experience, Heygears has the best auto supports out of any slicer that's out there right now, in my opinion. I mean, there may be some obscure industrial slicer thing that I have no idea about that may be better, but in my experience, out of the things that I have used, this is the way to do it for sure. I used to manually support stuff on my own, and it's just such a headache, such a pain in the butt having to, if you have an issue, go back and re-support, and it's just a pain, and nobody wants to do it. We want to print stuff, and that's the fun part, printing stuff, painting stuff, as I do selling stuff on my Etsy and whatnot. I don't want to have to do all that crazy stuff. So this is going to be the best way to do it. So once you import something, oh, and one thing to mention too, you kind of just use this as a starting point anyway, so it's not the end of the world. I'm going to show you where I typically start in terms of setting up the supports. But when you come into Blueprint and you go into the slicer, the first thing you're going to do is do your printer setup here. Typically I would always just choose, yeah, I'm sure it doesn't matter, Reflex or RS. It doesn't really matter, like I said, because you're going to, all this does is, since we're not worrying about the actual print settings, like, base layers, exposure time, motion system, all that stuff, none of that really matters since we're just using this for supporting the model. But some things do make a difference, like whether you choose the PRM or not, and then which resin you choose. That will make a difference on the default settings for the auto support algorithm. So what I do is I just always choose no add-on module, and then I choose PARP 10 or PAP 10. I don't think this really matters. It does make a difference in the starting point of the auto support settings, but we're probably gonna be changing that stuff anyway. So alright, so once we're in, we import a model, and then I always just orient it, do their auto orient. They do a pretty good job of making sure that it puts the model in a good position for printing. So I pretty much always orient it that way. If you want to orient it manually, you can do that as well. I typically just do the multi-objective optimal orientation. But if I don't like the way that it puts it, I may try some of these other ones just to see what it thinks is best if I have one of these other goals. But typically I just go with the multi-objective. Alright, so once we do that, select the model you want to support, auto support. Alright, so for my printers, it's going to depend on your printer, and some of this you're going to have to play with a little bit. So for example, like trunk diameter, like 0.75 millimeter, like this is a good bit thinner than like even the smallest support settings on like Lychee and Shit2Box. So you may need to bump this up. Like for my Mega 8K, I pretty much always just max this out, which is 1.02 millimeters. I don't know why it maxes out there, but that's the max for the max diameter you can do for the trunk diameter. But because that's a 15-inch 8K screen, I just think, those really small supports may just not play well with like the larger voxel size, or pixel size rather, on the screen of the Mega 8K. And sometimes when you print with too small of a trunk diameter, I'll have sections where the cross-section supports on the support lattice like fail, or like for a couple sections it doesn't print right. So I typically make this thicker just to give it a better chance to stick together and make sure that the support lattice fully prints. But you can experiment with this on your own printers and see. The smaller you can make it, the better. It just makes it a little easier to remove models from the supports, because if it's thinner, you can just kind of give the supports a squeeze and it'll usually just pop right off, the model will. And then also obviously the resin cost savings, you can save some money by saving resin by using a smaller trunk diameter. Overhang angle, I pretty much always do about 35. It depends on what you're printing and how you're orienting it. Like one of the things I sell is like book nooks. So they're like big cubes, or like rectangular cubes basically. And a lot of times I'll just put them on the plate and I'll angle them either 45 degrees X or Y depending on the specific book nook. So like for example, if I orient that at 45 degrees or 40 degrees, well, I want the whole back side of the model to be supported. So if I orient it at a 40-degree angle, I'll set this to 40 to make sure that the auto support algorithm supports that full backside. Because if I have this set to 35, but I have my model oriented at a 40-degree angle, well, it's only going to put supports on faces that are at a 35-degree or lower angle. So that's basically what this does. You can play around with it depending on the orientation of the model, and you can kind of use this in combination with your orientation to kind of control where it's going to put the supports on your model to a degree. Like, you're not going to get full-blown control or anything like that, but it does give you a little bit of control of where they're going to go. Okay, so next, normally this would be set to sphere. Because I showed you that group assembly supporting, some of this is already changed, but normally this would be sphere by default. I always turn this to none. And then for embedded depth, if I'm doing 0.03 layer height, I do 0.09 millimeter embed depth. If I'm doing 0.05 millimeter layer height, then I usually do 0.1. If it's like a really big model on my 8K, I may do 0.15. Alright, and then tip diameter, by default, with those settings we chose, this would probably be 0.3. That's a pretty good starting point. If you're doing like smaller models, like, say a 32 millimeter mini like this, 0.3 is a good starting point to test. With your other printers, you can absolutely go ahead and start shrinking this until you start to get failures or sections of the print that don't print right. So you can start at 0.3. That's a pretty good starting point. If you're on like a larger format printer or something, like the GK3 that's coming, or the Mega 8K, and it's a larger model, then I usually kind of top out around 0.38 to 0.4. That's usually the biggest that I go when I do this. But typically I'm somewhere around 0.35, 0.30 to 0.35. And then same thing like we talked about earlier, reinforce height. This works the same way. Depending on the model, you may want to increase this, you may want to decrease this. I would say don't go any lower than 2 millimeters. This is probably a big reason of why these supports are so good. It just does such a good job of supporting those lowest sections, and gives you a really good base for the printer to print from. So I would say don't put this lower than 2 millimeters, but you can increase it if you, like we talked about before. Contact distance and border contact distance. If you've ever done like supports projection on Lychee, this is basically your border supports, like around the outline of each shape that gets supported, how far between each support, and then the contact distance is the inside support. So inside that outer border, how far apart are each supports, or how far apart is each support. So you can play with this a little bit too. I try and keep it. I usually just keep this the same. When I first started doing this, I would mess with this a little bit more, but honestly, I just leave it where it's at. If I'm doing like a really big model or like a book nook or something, I may increase the XY lattice size a little bit. Lattice size Z, I usually just leave this at 6. This is the distance from the top of like the support lattice that gets built. How much distance from the top of that support lattice, how long is that last section that goes from the top of the support lattice to the actual model. This is the distance there, so 6 millimeters seems to just kind of work for everything. There's really no reason to change this one. The XY size changes how far apart your posts are. So you have like your support posts, like grid supports, and then there's the X bracings between them. Think of like, all right, you're moving the two posts farther apart, and that X is getting longer and bigger between there. So basically less overall supports in your lattice going up and down, less posts, and then longer bridge gaps with your bracings between them. So you can technically make this bigger to try and save some resin, or if it's like a really big model and you just don't want the supports to be like too stiff, like too many supports where it's hard to break the model off, you can increase this a little bit. It'll increase that distance between the posts, make it a little bit easier to like squeeze it once it's done to get your model off the supports. But for the most part, the default settings here are going to be fine. And then you can do the same thing. So if you like made your XY a little bit bigger, you could go ahead and make this, maybe 3 millimeters and 3 millimeters. Mostly this is all just fine tuning if you're trying to be as efficient as possible and to save resin and save money. Alright, trying to think if there's anything else I can really share. Oh, how to export it. Alright. So there it is, supported. Select it. And then up here at the top left, there's this 3 boxes and a plus. Export selected model. 1 STL file. And then you can go ahead and save it wherever. And now you have a pre-supported STL file. One thing I did kind of run into, just to let everyone know, for some reason, maybe it's just my frozen printer. I've been having a ton of issues with that printer. It's just kind of been a nightmare. But I initially used Lychee for everything. Once I started using Blueprint and stuff, I would do my pre-supporting, and then I would take it over to Lychee to slice it and then print on my frozen Mega 8K. But for some reason, it just does not like the Blueprint supports for whatever reason. And it would give me all kinds of bad slice files where it was just artifacts. There was like ghost pixels and sections that just didn't properly slice, and just all kinds of issues. So one day I decided to try Chitubox instead, and so far slicing with Chitu with Blueprint pre-supported models, I haven't had any issues. It slices them completely fine. They come out almost as good as they do on a Heygears printer. So definitely use Chitu, I think. I mean, definitely if you guys want to try Lychee, go for it. But I'll just let you know now, if you start having weird issues with these models and you're slicing with Lychee, try Chitubox and see if it makes a difference, because it was for me. Alright, and then you can do multiple things as one STL. So say I'm like supporting a big like base for like a larger model or something like that I'm hollowing. Like usually I will do I'll do like holes in it, obviously, so that you don't get trapped resin. But one of your options in Blueprint is the truncated cone shape hole. And then you can have it keep the peg, so you'll have like a cone shaped hole peg that it'll print the model with your holes in it, and then you have the peg already printed too. And you can, I always do 0.18 millimeter for the fitting allowance for your tolerance, and that lets me 99% of the time put that plug into the hole, and it's like dead flat. You won't even know it's there after you glue it in and put some paint over it. Sometimes it may stick out a little bit, or if like depending on where it put the supports on the plug, you may have to clean up the edges of the plug just to make sure it sits fully flush. But typically, even if it does stick out a little bit, just use an X-Acto or a hobby knife, and you can kind of scrape the plug off like you're using a chisel, and just chisel it flat, and you won't even know that hole is there. So say I had a big hollow base and I had a couple pegs that I wanted that I'm printing on one of my different printers. I will go ahead and, orient, support, hollow, all that stuff, put my holes in it, and then I'll put the plug somewhere like right inside. Like say we had all our supports going around here, but then we have our raft and there's some open space in the raft. I'll usually take the plugs and like find a spot to tuck them in on that same raft. And then I'll select all of those. I'll select the model and the plugs, and then export as an STL, a single STL. And then this way here, when I import that model into another slicer for printing, It already has the model, it's already supported, the plugs are there, everything's ready to go. It's as simple as just drag and drop it in your other slicer, slice it and print it, and it's ready to go. Alright, I think that's pretty much everything I have to share at this time. I'm super hyped that I've talked to them and found out about that grouping function to do. That is going to make setting up full plates of models so much easier. So I hope that helps you guys. I hope the exporting as STL helps you guys. Yeah, that's it. If I have anything else cool to share, I will make another video. Thanks, guys.